My name's Byron Donalds. It's kind of littered all over the living room here and on a couple signs outside. I am running for the United States Congress. But I think we have to have a change in what our elected representatives are today. In my view, our elected representatives must be champions for individual liberty and limited constitutional government. You know, if you look at where we are today, we have massive debt, we have unfunded liabilities, our systems are disasters, our educational system is a mess, immigration makes no sense. We can go on and on. We all know it. We watch Fox News. Somebody in here told me, watch Charles Krauthammer. We watch Charles Krauthammer and we shake our heads too. I was doing it myself. But what I realized is our congressmen, our political leaders have to do two very important things. The first thing is they have to know our issues, really know them, not just spew talking points. They have to know them. They have to know the history of how we got to this point, and they have to be able to create solutions to lead us forward. The second thing they have to be able to do is convince the electorate. Now, that second thing is very important. You have to be able to go out there and convince the average voter that we are right. Just like this lady who's going past in her boat right now. You have to convince her that we're right. And if you can do that, but it's true. Those are the people we have to get. And if you can do that, you will have the political will necessary to reverse course in America and change Washington, which is something that everybody has been clamoring to do. My wife talked a little bit about me. I'm 33 years old. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. I'm the product of a single parent household. My mother struggled when I was a young man. She took me out of elementary school in the first grade because she knew the public education system was going to fail me. And she was right. It would have failed me. And she struggled to put me through private education my entire time in New York. I went to Florida State University. I graduated from there with a degree in finance and marketing, met my lovely wife. We moved here to Naples, primarily because Naples had a lot of banks and brokerage houses, and it seemed like a great place to get started. But it did. It seemed like a great place to get started, and it was a great place to get started. We have three lovely children. But as I watch my kids, as I watch other kids that we've worked with, kids that I've coached Little League and Pee Wee football with, as I watch my sister who just graduated college last week, I know these young people are not going to have the opportunity to succeed because the federal government is falling apart around our very eyes. We all see it. So what are we going to do about it? Well, like I said, there's two jobs for a congressman. The first, policy. We all know that kind of stuff. Policy. What are you going to do? What are you going to vote on? What are you going to implement? I believe that if you're going to really change the course in Washington and here in America, you have to change taxation in America. Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy famously said in the Obamacare hearings, he said, this individual mandate changes the relationship between government and the people. And Anthony Kennedy was right. But that wasn't the first time that relationship has been changed. The first time that relationship changed was with the 16th Amendment under Woodrow Wilson. That was the first time the fundamental relationship between the individual and the federal government was changed. The second time was with FDR under the New Deal and Social Security. The third time was under LBJ and the Great Society and Medicare and Medicaid. And now the fourth time is the individual mandate under Barack Obama, that fundamental transformation that he loves to talk about. If we're going to begin a reverse course, you have to change taxation. A lot of people are frustrated with the income tax code. So why do we try to tinker in the edges? I say it's time to get rid of it altogether. I am a supporter of the fair tax. I believe we have to change taxation from income-based to consumption-based taxation. If you change to a consumption-based tax, which is the fair tax, it does a number of things. It gets rid of the corporate income tax. It gets rid of the dividends tax. It gets rid of the capital gains tax. It gets rid of the withholding tax and the payroll tax and the individual income tax rate. All those go away. That would give all Americans the opportunity to choose when they pay taxes, as opposed to being told when to pay taxes. Right now, we are subjects to the IRS. We're not sovereigns when it comes to taxation. We have become subjects in America. If you want the average citizen who just went by in her boat, if you want her to care about what's going on in Washington, D.C., about the spending that's taking place, you have to make her want to care when she spends her money or his money. When you go to buy this new chair and you see the federal income taxes that are going to Washington, that's going to make the average person look at their receipt and say, now, wait a minute. I just sent $100 to Washington. What are they actually doing with my money? In that very instance, that's how you begin to put these eyes of the average citizen on the politician and on Washington, D.C. And that is why I support the fair tax. Now, there are other reasons to support it. First of all, on an economic basis, under the first year of implementation, under various studies, GDP growth will be anywhere between 7 to 10% in the first year. These billions of dollars that are overseas, that are talked about all the time, where would that money go if there was no more corporate income tax in America? It would come right back here. It would come home to be invested here in America. I love the talk about how politicians create jobs. And they're all saying in my state, we created jobs. Under this plan, we created jobs. They're all talking about it, but they create nothing. What creates jobs is capital investment and business creation and formation. That's what creates jobs. So if we know that's the case, why would we tax and limit the amount of capital to come to America when there's a better way? Why would we do that? Some say, Byron, that's a great idea, but the fair tax won't pass. I say it hasn't passed because nobody's ever talked about it and sold it to the American people. If you tell the average citizen you get to keep all the fruits of your labor, no more withholding taxes, you get to keep it, what do you think they're going to say? They're going to say, really? I like that. For one very important reason. We all seek our own interests. We all do. I talked to many of you, pretty much all of you in this room when you came in. We shared stories about our lives. And in every story, you all have decided to do what you want to do because it's your life. Well, if people seek their own interests, why wouldn't they seek their own interests when it comes to taxes? Of course they would. And it's time to begin to lay that foundation to go to the fair tax. I'm going to marry two subjects because the big subject in today's elections is spending. We want to talk about spending. We got to cut spending. We got to get government out of the way. That's the big talk today. How are we going to pay down our debt if we just simply cut spending? We have to grow the economy. And in my view, if you want to begin to pay down our debt, you have to grow the economy, which the fair tax would do, because we would have more capital flowing into America than we knew what to do with. And then if you cut spending and have mandatory spending caps, that creates the surpluses in Washington to begin to pay down the national debt. That's the great compromise in Washington that needs to be found. But let's focus on spending. I believe you have to end baseline budgeting. If you don't know what baseline budgeting is, the federal government's budgets automatically increase every year. They just automatically increase because they're set that way. Republican of Texas Louis Gohmert sponsored the end of baseline budgeting, the last 4 Congresses. Under that legislation, according to CBO, the equivalent would be a $9.1 trillion cut in spending. $9.1 trillion. S&P wanted us to cut $4 trillion just to save the credit rating. If we change the way we budget in Washington, we would save $9.1 trillion because the budget wouldn't automatically increase year over year. Your budgets don't automatically increase year over year. I know my own household budget doesn't do that. So why does Washington's? It should not. Frankly, because Washington doesn't have any money anyway. It's our money. It's our money. They're talking about spending and investments and we need to get more revenue. What they're really talking about is finding ways to get more money from us to waste in other places. So we have to end that entire relationship by ending baseline budgeting and going to zero-based budgeting, or what is commonly known as family budgeting. That just makes sense, especially when you're dealing with a country that's out of money every year. Okay? Once you implement baseline budgeting, once you have legitimate conversations about spending, let me go back a minute. Right now, if you wanted to cut $100 billion out of spending, if you wanted to cut $100 billion, the argument from the left would be you're cutting the budget on the backs of the poor. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about money that's never been spent in world history. When they cut in Washington, they're cutting money that's never been spent. That's how you know it to be the case, because the chimes are going off. They're cutting money that's never been spent in world history. In 1992, my mother lost her job. And she was doing odd jobs to still keep me in private school. And so we went on assistance for a short amount of time. We had no problems getting help at that point in our lives. So how is it today if we cut $100 billion, we're cutting it on the backs of the poor, when in 1992, my mother was able to get help when she needed it at the time? That makes no sense. I've been waiting for a Republican to make that argument, but it hasn't come. So I say it's time for me to make that argument, so the American people understand that when they talk about cutting spending, we're cutting money that's never been spent before. That's why you have to end baseline budgeting. And then once you do that, then we'd go to cut, cap, and balance, or a similar balanced budget amendment that's tied to the gross domestic product. Real quick. Last summer, when cut, cap, and balance passed the House, and it went to the Senate, and Harry Reid quickly tabled it. He tabled it. It didn't even come up for a debate or discussion. The Buffett rule came up for debate and a vote this year in the United States Senate. But cut, cap, and balance couldn't. The United States Senate has not passed a budget in almost 1,200 days. But they wouldn't debate cut, cap, and balance. Do you know what happened 1,200 days ago? 1,200 days ago, the iPad was not even sold in America. It wasn't sold anywhere 1,200 days ago. Now, Apple has come out with 3 versions of the iPad since the last time the United States Senate passed a budget. That's how much time we're talking about here. Now, when they passed cut, cap, and balance in the House, and Harry Reid tabled it, here is what the Speaker and Mitch McConnell should have said. They should have went to the podium. I'm going to make a podium for myself. And they should have said, ladies and gentlemen, the United States House of Representatives has passed a strong measure not only to cut our spending going forward, but to raise the debt ceiling in the intermediate time. That is a great compromise for the American people, but Harry Reid and the Senate Democrats did not have the decency to actually debate this piece of legislation on the floor of the United States Senate. Since that is the case, the United States House of Representatives is now done doing business, and it is up to Harry Reid to provide legislation on which we can move forward. I didn't hear any of that. You know what I heard? The Boehner Plan, which ended up going into the Budget Control Act, which is now cutting almost $1 trillion in future Department of Defense spending. We have to have a balanced budget amendment, but we have to fight for a balanced budget amendment. It will never happen if we are just going to kick one plan off the face of the earth because Harry Reid won't bring it to a vote on the floor. We have to begin to lay the foundation for the American people so they understand that balanced budgets are going to be crucial for the survival of this nation. We have to begin to make the moral argument for a limited government in America, so all people know that without a sustained America, without a mindset and a vision for preserving this nation for the next 100 years, it is the very poor who are going to suffer. That's what we have to begin to say and speak. That's how we have to begin to sell our ideas to the American people. See? You know what I'm talking about. Now, healthcare. See, everybody got quiet on healthcare. It's my opinion that the president's healthcare plan will be overturned by the Supreme Court. That's my hope. I really hope that Anthony Kennedy woke up on the right day and said, you know what, this whole thing has to go. That is my hope. If the president's plan is allowed to remain, it's going to be a disaster for our private insurance markets and for healthcare costs in the nation. You know, there's really one reason healthcare costs continue to rise in America. And that's because we're spending other people's money on other people. That's why healthcare costs continue to rise in America. Milton Friedman said there are 4 ways to spend money. The most efficient way is when you spend your money on yourself because you have more care and concern for those dollars. It's your money. You're going to make sure you're getting the right amount, you're getting the right value for it. The most inefficient way is when you spend other people's money on other people because there's no care or concern. If you spend my money on her, what do you care if I'm getting my money's worth? It's not your money. What does she care if I'm getting my money's worth? She's getting it from you.
It's like a charge collar.
Thank you very much. When we talk about healthcare, I always like to use a prop because it's important for people to understand what I mean. This is my Motorola Razr. It's my new cell phone. I got it a month ago. Very excited, by the way. This thing has a 1080p high definition camera, video, high definition still camera. I can go on Facebook. I can go on Twitter. I can check my 5 different campaign email accounts, 5 different ones for the campaign. I can check them all. I can go on my work calendar. I can go do FaceTime with my sister who just moved to Atlanta. I can play Angry Birds. My kids can watch Netflix on here. The reason why this cell phone continues to get better every single year is because all of us have decided to spend our own money to find the best possible product at the lowest possible price to us. That's why consumer electronics gets better year after year, because it is not provided to us by our employers and it is not provided to us by the federal government. If the federal government still bought our cell phones for us, we would still be using the big clunky cell phone with the big antenna. That's what we would use because we wouldn't be actively seeking the best product with our own money. If we applied the economics in consumer electronics to healthcare, the cost of care would come down and it would be stable and the quality would get better because insurance companies will be battling each other for your money. Doctors will be battling each other for your money. Right now, they're not battling for your money because you're not even spending your money. You're spending somebody else's. And so you don't have the same care or concern that you use when you go and buy one of these. Obamacare needs to go. But there's still major healthcare reform that needs to be done. We're using a delivery system based out of World War II. Our men went off to war. Our women went into the workforce. And so we had to figure out how to get them insurance. And so the government said, we'll have the employers provide it. And it's never changed since then. And employers still provide it. That's why the cost of care continues to rise. So what I say is you get rid of the tax deductibility for a business to provide insurance. You give it to the individual, you remove it from the business. That way people buy their own insurance with pre-tax dollars. And if we adopt a fair tax, that won't be a problem anyway. Then you do open up insurance purchases across state lines. My iPad was manufactured in China. So was this thing probably. Ladies and gentlemen, we buy products from all over the world. All over the world. I think we could buy health insurance from New Mexico. When people use their money to seek their own interests, which is what all people do, when they use their money to find the best product at the lowest possible price, that's how costs are stabilized. That's how costs go down. And that's how you continue to get a better product for the amount of money that you spend. That's how you reform healthcare. And that's how you explain it to the American people. So they understand it's not the insurance companies against me. It's the fact that I'm not even spending my own money. And I have to get a better product. Now, the last thing I like to talk about is education. And this is a good illustration for education as well, but I'm going to put this away. Nobody likes talking about education today in politics. Everybody assumes it's all been solved. I don't know if you've noticed this, but in the state of Florida, our kids just failed, a large portion of our kids failed the FCAT. So they had to lower the standard to get all the kids in. Education is failing our children today for one simple reason. Our educational policy is being written out of Tallahassee and Washington. It's being written out of Tallahassee and Washington. And that has to end. I don't know how many of you went to the Golden Apple Awards. I know I went this year. And the teachers who were there, the teachers who were honored, they all said the same thing. They said, we just take the curriculum they give us and we mold it for the individual child because they all think differently. They all act differently. They're motivated in different ways. They want different things out of life. They have different strengths. They have different weaknesses. If that is the case, why would we continue to let Tallahassee and Washington design education curriculum for all of our kids? It makes no sense. I have 3 kids myself. They have friends that are on my block. I don't know those kids well enough to design math curriculum for them because I'm not there in those classrooms. The teachers are there. The principals are in those buildings. And it is the responsibility of the school board and the superintendent to design the policy for the kids in Collier County or the kids in Lee County or in Pinellas County or whatever county you want to talk about across America. Since the creation of the Department of Education, there has been no increase in educational standards for our kids. So why would we continue to spend trillions more down a rabbit hole that only works for the NEA? This is how you make the moral argument to our citizens why you have to get rid of the Department of Education. And furthermore, the Department of Education in Tallahassee. It must become local so that our teachers and our communities can design education for our kids so they are prepared for the trillions in debt we are leaving them. They are prepared for a global society tomorrow. They are prepared for the green jobs or the oil jobs or the whatever jobs that will come our way in the future. We need critical thinkers. We don't need top-down educational mandates. Our kids need to be able to think and process information as it comes to them. And that can only be done when the teachers in those classrooms and the principals have control over the educational system. And that's why we have to have major education reform. It's going to be crucial to the future of America. That's why I talk about it. It hasn't been solved by No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top. It has not been solved with FCAT standards and other state mandates. It will never be solved by those standards because politicians don't know a thing about education. We don't know a thing. And how could we? Because we're not smart enough to. I think I'm a very smart man. I do. But my intelligence is not greater than all of you in this room collectively. Because you all have led different lives. You have different experiences. There is a restraint that must come with our politicians. A restraint. They have to know what they do not know. And they cannot tread where they are not constitutionally authorized. I have been waiting for Republican leaders to speak this way and to talk this way. And I have not found it. So I decided to do it myself. I usually ask a question about now. When was the last time you heard a Republican talk like this?
That's why we're here.
I saw you speak last week.
Oh, okay. Never mind. Now, I said there are 2 jobs. That first job was the stuff I just talked about. The second job for a congressman is being an advocate for individual liberty in America. Ladies and gentlemen, there is nothing new under the sun. I've said a lot of times, I said it in January in Orlando, Barack Obama is not our political opponent. He's not our opponent. He is just a man. History is littered with men like Barack Obama. There have always been men who have thought that they can design society, that they could fundamentally transform society. There have always been men that have thought this way, and women. He's nothing new. The ideas I talk about today, they are nothing new. These are ideas based upon experience, looking at world history, understanding that the natural bent of all people is towards tyranny. The natural bent of government throughout world history is towards tyranny. Whether we are talking about a monarchy, a theocracy, an oligarchy, a politburo, whatever the case might be. Here in America, this is the exception. This is the exception because the framers of our Constitution looked at the tyranny of King George. They looked at the tyranny of the crown. They looked at the tyranny throughout world history. They looked to men like John Locke and Charles de Montesquieu and said, we have to do different. We have to create a different thing here if we're going to have a society that is preserved for all people. This is the theme that the Republican Party must have if we're going to reverse course in America. This party was born out of the abolitionist movement. This party was born out of the desire for all men to have liberty. And if we're going to be successful in future elections, not just 12, but in 14 and 16 and 20, which is what we're going to have to do if we're really going to reverse course, we have to have a theme based upon preserving America for the next 100 years. That is what all Americans want, for the most part. Milton Friedman also said, the freedom of my fist is limited by the proximity of your face. That's liberty. That needs to be the theme and the basis of our party. That is the second job for a United States congressman today in America. You have to be able to take this message everywhere. The NAACP, the Occupy movement, I don't like calling them Hispanics, the Cuban community, the Puerto Rican community, the Mexican community, the Guatemalan community. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what your nationality is. That is what has set America apart in world history. And that is what we have to bring to the table if we're going to reverse course. Ladies and gentlemen, we're out of time. We're out of time. A lot of us have been watching the news. We've been watching our elected officials. We've been waiting for them to get serious. We've been hoping that they would stand firm, and they have not. So why would we continue to do what we have always done? If we continue to do that, we will always be where we have always been. And that is frustrated. And that's always looking to the next person. We have to do better. We have to think differently. We have to act differently if we're going to preserve the greatest nation man has ever known. I'm a huge fan of Frédéric Bastiat. He wrote an essay called The Law. Bastiat was a philosopher from 1850 France. So he saw the French Revolution coming. And you know what Bastiat said about the French Revolution? He said the genesis of it is that we had politicians who would subvert the law for a favored interest. Whether it would be big labor, big welfare, big corporation, it didn't matter. Politicians all around the aisle, all around the aisle were subverting the law on behalf of a favored interest against the rest of the people. He said what ended up happening was the people were being pushed to and fro in the midst of what he called contending utopias. Isn't that where we are today? Which one of our leaders is actually talking about these kind of things? Which one of them actually has a mindset for the history that got us to where we are, so they can design a vision and a policy to get us out of where we are today? And with all that being said, I need your help. I'm asking for your help. I want to thank Butch and Drew for opening up their home again to me, because it's with your help that we will begin the long, hard work to reverse course here in America. And I want to thank you all for being here this afternoon. I'll take any questions you have of me. Thank you.
I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
I have a dog in this hunt since I'm not from here.
Okay.
What's your definition of fair?
My definition of fair?
Yes.
Fair is a matter of how hard you're willing to work for it. There is no such thing as fair. That's what I teach my kids. It's funny. We were in the car this afternoon. I have an 8-year-old, I have a 4-year-old, I have a 1-year-old. So the 4-year-old found my 8-year-old's paper on the floor from church. He's rolling it up. He's playing with it. The 8-year-old's like, give it to me. Give me. He's like, Dad, tell him to give it to me. I said, did you have it? No. Was it on the floor? Yeah. Well, now it's his. But I want it. That's not fair. Life is not fair. We don't teach our kids that life is fair, but somehow when we become adults, we expect it to be fair. And we listen to people who say, well, that's just not fair. Well, here's a better question. Who's going to be the arbiter of this fairness? Barack Obama? A better question? Me? Am I now going to be the arbiter of fairness? I just met you 10 minutes ago. How do I know what's fair to you versus him if I just met you? What about if I don't even know you? How am I going to be the arbiter of fairness if I don't even know you? You see, that's truly unfair. I love Milton Friedman. He said so many wonderful things. He said, a society that puts equality before freedom will have very little of both. A society that puts freedom before equality will have both in great measure. Because in order for me to make things equal, I have to first take it from you. And I got to really take it from all of you if I'm going to make it fair. So I'm waiting for leaders to be able to, when he brings up that fairness, to split him, politically speaking, right between the eyes with that fairness thing. So that's what I think about it. And by the way, even though you don't live in this district, I am representing you because my vote affects everybody.
No, you're right.
With the IRS being a private corporation, not a government entity or agency at all, and they're the ones that are sort of quote unquote licensed to collect taxes for our government.
Yeah.
And they have their, I don't know what their payroll is or whatever. If we went to the fair tax,
Yes.
first of all, we'd have to get rid of all those people
Yeah.
and their payroll.
In the IRS.
All the lawyers that are specialists that protect corporations and individuals lists to figure out what the tax law is. How many people would that put out of work? We did fair tax. The accountants, yes. The accountants. I mean, it would be massive layoffs of people. It had nothing to do.
Yes and no.
That's why it's not done.
Yes and no. Listen, my first comment, because that's a great question, by the way. It is not the purpose of government to write policy to keep an industry employed. That's not the purpose of government. Okay? Now, with respect to tax accountants, I was having this conversation with my wife. The tax accountant industry, if you will, they're having to beg people to go to school to study tax law. They don't have enough people coming in, young people. They're begging them to come in and become tax accountants. They're paying them to go to school to become tax accountants. So that industry, when it comes to employment, I think it would be actually a great help to them without such a massive tax code. The tax code, I think, is 12 feet tall? If you stacked it up, it's 12 feet tall. Again, I'll say it's not the purpose of government to create jobs through policy, through specific policy like the tax code. What these people would do, lawyers, I mean, listen, a lawyer will always tell you they're one of the smartest people in the world. I like lawyers, sorry if you're a lawyer, but listen, because there are good lawyers, but listen, if our GDP, which is right now about 15 trillion and a half, give or take, if that increases to 16 trillion under the fair tax, we're talking about another $1 trillion of economic activity taking place in America. I am quite sure that those who were displaced from the IRS, those who were displaced from the tax lobby will find something to do with their time. They obviously are high skilled and smart enough to do so. You know, the first thing that has to happen before you even start talking about who's going to lose their job is you got to first explain it to the American people. That foundation has not even been laid yet for the people to decide what kind of tax policy they want to fund the necessary functions of government. That's the purpose of taxation, really, to fund the necessary functions of government. Under the current tax code, even if we had the mindset of saying, you know what, we got to make sure we have enough taxes to come in to fund government, it's not possible under the income tax code. It's already been proven. It's not possible to generate the amount of revenue you need to pay for this size of government. If that's the case, why would we continue? Adding another tax code, which is what I believe Nancy Pelosi wanted to do, adding a VAT tax, which is one of the most disastrous and punitive things you can do in addition to an income tax, adding that wouldn't increase revenue to Washington. It would suppress it. You know, one of the things about the tax argument, the most revenue the federal government ever received was in 2006 under the dreaded Bush tax cuts. That was the most revenue Washington ever received. And they talk about how it's not fair. but it's created the most amount of revenue to Washington it's ever seen. I am a believer in the fair tax. I think under static modeling, it's revenue neutral, but under dynamic scoring, understanding that people seek their own interests, and if you tell people if you tell businesses you get to keep all their money, guess where they're going to go? They're going to come here. Why would they go to China and have to worry about their intellectual property being stolen when they can come here? On a side argument with taxation as a regulatory state, that thing has to be completely overhauled as well. Regulatory state has to be completely overhauled. You mentioned energy, or the Department of No Energy, how some people like to call it. We have abandoned nuclear power in America. We need to go back to that. They found about 3 trillion barrels of oil under the most recent United States Geological Survey in Wyoming. It's called the Green River Formation. Under current technology, about half of that is recoverable. So we're talking about 1.5 trillion barrels of oil in the United States of America, currently under federal lands in Wyoming. And they say we can't be energy independent. We could put Anwar off to the side. Don't even put anything in the Gulf. Just go to Green River and do what they're doing in the Balkans. Bring back nuclear. We should have all the energy we could possibly ever need for a dynamic economy to put all these out-of-work tax accountants to work. Wow. Okay.
Byron, I got a question for you.
Yes, sir.
At my age, I've watched a bunch of you young guys go down there at Washington. Mm-hmm. And pretty soon you just become part of the establishment.
Yep.
I see Mr. Lugar moved to Washington and had a hard time even voting in Indiana because he hadn't been a resident there for years. Mm-hmm. And how do you resist that?
Well, the first thing is her. Our agreement is that if you go and do this, you better not do what you just mentioned because my kids are young. You know, and listen, it's easy to be like, okay, and then I just move them up to Washington. I feather my own nest. They're secure and that's okay. But, you know, if I do that, there's no hope for these kids. The kids I don't know. You know, I wrote down a while ago, the purpose of government is to provide the stability so that all people can have an opportunity to succeed, even those we will never see. The we will never see part is what holds a politician accountable. The other thing I proposed in this race is called the People's Congress. And that's where I would have quarterly meetings with the leadership of every group in Southwest Florida. Occupy movement, NAACP, League of Women Voters, Tea Party movement, church, it doesn't matter. They all come together, not individual one-on-one meetings in back rooms. Everybody, one big room. We sit down and we talk. You can share the issues, what's going on in Southwest Florida with me. I can tell you what's happening in Washington. That's how you keep your congressman tied to your community. The second thing it does, now all these leaders have relationships with one another. They may not agree on everything, but they have relationships. So if they see something going on with me, they say, you know what? I don't know what's going on with Byron. I don't like how he voted the last couple times. We might need to get rid of him. At least now the community groups have relationships so that they can pull their political power to do something about me. See, these are the kind of things that have to start happening. We have to empower our citizens to feel that they're a part of the process so that they don't just continue to be apathetic to the process, which only empowers men like Dick Lugar. And so, in my opinion, those are the things that have to happen. You had a question?
No, I was just going to say, I'm on your page politically and the issues, but what can we as people here in this room, other than funding, of course, which is very important, what's the most important thing for getting your message out to people that just don't get it and are uneducated? I hate to say it, but they are on the dole, they're, you know, getting government money, and they just don't understand what America is built on and the entrepreneurial spirit. And I think that there's a, I don't think you have to convince all of us, but we need to go out and convince other people. How can we do that in the best possible way?
Well, actually, that's why I used that lady who was passing by on her boat, because you're right. I don't have to convince you. You guys agree with me.
Right.
We got to convince them. I think you do that in a couple ways. Number one, you can't just campaign when it's campaign time. You have to campaign all the time. And I think this goes back to the People's Congress, what I was talking about. The groups, listen, the Occupy movement, they may never agree with me on some things. They probably won't. But one thing they're starting to agree, and I've talked to a couple of them, even though they're still kind of spaced out on some things. The one thing they agree on is that people have to start caring about politics. And that best happens when you go to your friends and your neighbors. And if you're part of the process with me, if we're in contact, you feel more empowered to go and talk to your neighbor about what we need to do. It really goes back to that. The second thing I think you got to do is your congressman's got to show up. You know, I was out at the swamp buggy races signing petitions, and a good friend of mine is one of the directors for the swamp buggy races, and he was like, "You sure you want to come out here and do this?" I said, "Yeah, people are there. Let's go sign petitions. Get on the ballot." By the way, we're on the ballot, by the way. So, but let's go get on the ballot. Let's go sign petitions. People are walking around out there like, "What are you doing out here?" I'm getting petitions signed. I'm meeting the people. This is what you're supposed to do, right? There hadn't been a congressman out here in 30 years. That's a problem. The first day I went to sign petitions, it was myself, it was my wife. Where's Ty? It was Ty. We are out at the NAACP Martin Luther King Jr. Festival in Canberra Park. This is January 17th. We're out there. There was only one other Republican in that whole parade, and that was Jim Coletta. He was the only one. Jim Coletta and me. And they thought I was a Democrat. So I showed them my petition, and they're like, "Hey, wait a minute."
Why would they think that?
And they're like, "Wait a minute. At first, you're running for Congress? This is great." Then they looked at the petition. Wait, it says here you're a Republican. I am. Oh, because why do they say this and why do they say that? And when they start asking them the questions, that is the opportunity to educate the electorate. One of the ladies in the NAACP, we had lunch and we talked for a long time. At the end of our lunch, she started doing this. She was shaking her head like, "Yeah, you're right about that." And she said, she went back to Jim Coletta. She said, "You know why we vote for Jim Coletta?" I said, "No, why do you vote for Jim Coletta?" She said, "We vote for him because he comes. Because he shows up. We may not always agree with him, but at least he comes and he hears what we have to say." Now, how do you help me with that? Number one, as the next congressman, I would hope that you will continue to be on my team with me, not just in campaign time. Because in order to do what we have to do, we have to campaign all the time. That's sending emails to your friends, like some of you already do. That's being on the phone. That's sometimes having, you know what, there's a big piece of legislation we're trying to push. Let's get out on the ground like we're trying to sign petitions, and let's educate the people door to door. Let's get out there and do it. Another thing, I think our churches have to be a lot more active politically. I think they do. The churches is really what helped to start the revolution to begin with against King George. And there's going to be a requirement of our churches to be engaged in our politics once again. And that's how we begin to advance the message and the agenda. Now, I'm going to go to my self-interest. How do I get elected? You mentioned a great reason up front, funding. Again, I need your help with that. There's no doubt about it. But also, we have several people in this room have been burning up their email lists about our campaign. They've been calling their friends about this campaign. They said, "Listen, he's the guy. You got to come out and see him. You got to hear him. Go to the website. I wrote a vision for America's future. It's on that table. Read it. I have it in PDF on my website. Email that to your friends." You know, of course, financial donations are greatly appreciated. That will help us put the mail pieces out that we need in order to get our message out to the community about this particular campaign. But if we're going to reverse course, we have to do that all the time. And that's what I'm committed to do, because that's the only thing that's going to work. You're not going to be able to do anything in Washington without the will of the people behind you. And you got to be able to change seats. And you do that with the will of the people behind you.
Are you doing a lot of speaking at the universities and colleges and everything in our area? Because I think that's a really important vote this year.
It is an important vote. We haven't gotten there yet, but we actually have some contacts to get there. It's tough now because it's summertime. But again, like I say, the president, he actually does a phenomenal job of going to the universities.
So he's
he's got a plan.
He's got a plan. But you touch on a very important subject.
I thought he said he has a plane.
A plane? Oh, yeah, but there are more of us than there is of him. He's just one person. The president has a plane. He also has a plan. He has both.
Also money.
Well, but here's the thing, though. He has a plane. He makes a concerted effort to go. Why does he make the concerted effort to go? Because he knows if they hear him first, they will agree with him because he goes. And I think we got to do that all the time as well. Especially here in this district. You should be sick of me as your next congressman. Like, oh man, here comes Byron again. He's going to talk to us again about what's going on in Washington. You have to get sick of me. But that means that I'm doing the job necessary. Yes, ma'am.
Byron, I have a two-part question. I'll start with the first. Which individuals in Washington or in the Republican Party structure at this moment do you admire most and feel that you would work with?
Right now, I know Jim DeMint, this is his last term, but he's been a phenomenal leader in the conservative movement. Mike Lee of Utah, I believe, is one of the great rising stars. So is Rand Paul. So is our very own Senator Marco Rubio. In the House, Steve King of Iowa has been fantastic as a freshman. Justin Amash out of, I believe it's Pennsylvania. He's been wonderful. I mentioned Louis Gohmert in my remarks. Michelle Bachmann has taken on a star power in the House that is going to be very important to us. Oh, I didn't even get to Florida yet. I'm working my way down. We actually have a couple of great congressmen here. We have Steve Sutherland in the northern part of the state. And of course, we have Alan West. And these are all people who they think along the lines that I'm speaking. They just don't have the numbers. You know, I was asked by a Ron Paul supporter 6 months ago. They said, what do you think about the fact that Ron Paul has only passed 2 pieces of legislation in 30 years? Put aside whatever you think of Ron Paul. I said, that means Ron Paul doesn't have enough help. He doesn't have enough numbers. And on the domestic front, domestic policy, Ron Paul's right in a lot of things when it comes to domestic policy. He really is. Foreign policy is where he and I differ. But when it comes to domestic policy, the man is largely right. Those are the people that I think I could definitely work with. Now, that always leads, and maybe I'm jumping the gun, because I think that always leads to the compromise question. For those who are not familiar, we all know the Constitutional Convention is how we got the current Constitution. But what they began with was to amend the Articles of Confederation. And when they got in there in Philadelphia, they ended up throwing out the whole thing and starting again. I'm of the mindset that if you had Nancy Pelosi, Harry Reid, Dick Durbin, Chuck Schumer, if you gave them the opportunity to get their hands on the Constitution and rewrite it, it would be lights out for the country. It really would be, because they would not have the impediments on them by the Constitution that has really stopped them from doing what they really want to do. And so that can never happen. And I agree with you wholeheartedly on this. Whenever I hear somebody ask for that, we got to go stand in the corner and talk for about 30 minutes.